Happiness is a broad word with meanings that can range from the more even-keeled positive emotions of contentment, peacefulness, and gratitude to more volcanic emotions of joy, delight, even ecstasy. In the founding documents of this country, Thomas Jefferson named life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as unalienable rights. And how many books and articles are written each year about happiness? What is it, and how can we get more of it? But happiness is only one of the major emotions, which are sometimes listed as glad, sad, mad, and bad, meaning fear and shame. The 13th century Sufi mystic poet Rumi wrote about how these different emotions sweep through our lives in a poem titled The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes. There's wisdom in Rumi's advice. Seek to witness, without judgment, whatever emotions arise within you, knowing that even the most intense will eventually fade. As the saying goes, the only way out is through. It's also true that some among us are more naturally optimistic, others are more naturally melancholic, and still others of us have a more natural baseline of equanimity. Some activities that made us happy as a child can continue to be a source of happiness to this day. And science has shown that activities that are totally immersive, that put us in a state that psychologists call flow, are reliable sources of happiness. But giving yourself permission to be fully absorbed in an activity without any distractions can be elusive in this age of smartphones and other technologies. Think of the differences in immersion between going to a movie theater, turning off your phone, watching a truly excellent and engaging film, versus you're watching a TV show, scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, maybe TikTok on your laptop, and maybe you're also responding to some periodic texts on your phone. As Jonathan Haidt has detailed in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, Finding Modern Truth in Ancient Wisdom, some of the many immersive experiences that can cultivate flow are savoring an excellent meal, dancing, an intense conversation with a friend, creating art like painting, sculpting, writing, photography, hiking, cooking, hosting a dinner party, gardening, reading a great novel, and as some of us can attest, singing in a choir. Your personalities and proclivities will determine which of these activities is the most absorbing to you. This insight about the importance of carving out time and space in your life for activities you find fully absorbing doesn't mean you have to spend all your time trying to be in the zone. Rather, it's an encouragement to discern if there are ways to have more immersive experiences in your life. One of Reverend Carl's favorite stories along these lines is about the physicist A.A. Michelson, as told by the novelist Norman Maclean in his book, Young Men and Fire. When I was a young teacher and still thought of myself as a billiards player, I had the pleasure of watching Michelson play billiards nearly every noon. He was by then one of our national idols, having been the first American to win the Nobel Prize in Science for the measurement of the speed of light, among other things. To me, he took on an added luster because he was the best amateur billiards player I had ever seen. One noon, while he was still shaking his head at himself for having missed an easy shot, after he'd had a run of 35 or 36, I said to him, "You're a fine billiards player, Mr. Michelson." He shook his head at himself and said, "No, I'm getting old. I can still make those 3 long cushion shots, but I'm losing my touch on the short ones." He chalked up, but instead of taking the next shot, he finished what he had to say. "Billiards, though a good game, but billiards is not as good a game as chess." Still chalking his cue, he said, "Chess, though, is not as good a game as painting." And he made it final by saying, "But painting is not as good a game as physics." And then he hung up his undoubtedly well-chalked cue and went home to spend the afternoon painting under the large tree on his front lawn. As you reflect on some potential parallels in your own life, I invite you to remain seated as we sing the first verse of hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us.
Many of the approaches we've explored so far for the pursuit of happiness are relatively mundane. What about more extreme potential sources of happiness and unhappiness? Consider, for example, scientific studies into the comparative effect on happiness from major life-changing events, such as winning the lottery or becoming paralyzed. Studies show that humans are terrible at what psychologists call affective forecasting, predicting how we will feel in the future. Remember that opening line from the Rumi poem, this being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival. Although there are outliers to every trend, in studying the long-term effects of two life-changing events, winning the lottery, becoming paralyzed, it turns out that most of us grossly overestimate the intensity and the duration of our emotional reactions. I have friends that have become paralyzed, so I do not say this lightly. But studies show that within a year, both lottery winners and paraplegics both have, on average, returned most of the way to their baseline levels of happiness. In that first year after winning a multi-million-dollar jackpot, lottery winners often get significant short-term boosts in happiness from the newly acquired ability to buy a house, take an exotic vacation, quit their job, not necessarily in that order. But even within a few months, all those new acquisitions become a new normal. After that short-term happiness boost from the change in status fades, lottery winners tend to return to their former level of happiness. And there is often conflict with family and friends over whether one is willing to share the winnings, conflict that causes unhappiness. As the saying goes, wherever you go, there you are. You are still the same person with all your emotional baggage, even if you are millions of dollars richer. All that being said, studies also show that nearly all lottery winners are still glad that they won. Shocker. On the other side of the spectrum are studies of people who become paralyzed and face initial devastation. But just as the lottery winner had an initial surge in happiness, people who become paralyzed tend to have an initial surge of depression that levels out over the first year. Our human brains tend to have both an incredible short-term sensitivity to changes and a tremendous long-term capacity to adapt to whatever the new normal is in ways that are difficult for us to understand in advance. As the physicist Stephen Hawking has said about his motor neuron disease, my expectations were reduced to zero when I was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus. Lottery winners tend to assume at first that they will never be sad again. And people who are suddenly paralyzed often assume that they will never be happy again. Neither of those tends to be true. Relatedly, our human capacity to adjust in a relatively short time to a new normal also means, for example, that the warnings about normalizing authoritarian threats to our body politic are important to heed. History has shown us that we humans can become adjusted to horrors. As the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, we are certain things in our nation and in the world which I am proud to be maladjusted. And I also hope all men of goodwill will be maladjusted until the good societies realize. May we be among those who remain maladjusted to injustice, and may we also freely choose to side with love. In that spirit, remain seated as we sing verse 2 of Love Will Guide Us.
For now, Having considered two of the more extreme examples of the unexpected roller coasters on which we can find ourselves in this life, let us expand our view to three different types of happiness. As historian Jennifer Hecht has written about in her book, The Happiness Myth, an Exposé, when considering the pursuit of happiness, one's response might look very different in regard to pursuing a happy moment, a happy day, and a happy life. A euphoric, ecstatic, joyous moment might come from listening to an amazing song or going to an incredible concert. It could come from seeing a particular beautiful vista, having great sex, taking some drugs, or the exhilaration of engaging in dangerous behavior. These sources of euphoria are intense but fleeting and have diminishing marginal effectiveness over time. Although there's a lot to be said about the virtues of pleasurable moments, we need to be honest that they are not building blocks for a happy life, and that they sometimes carry the risk of prematurely ending a life. Expanding beyond intensely happy moments, which might skyrocket you to peaks of rapture, but then send you plummeting back down, what might contribute to a happy day? As neuroscientists remind us, our brains have evolved to be like Velcro for the negative experiences and Teflon for the positive experiences. So pausing, even for a second, to savor positive experiences can tip the scales toward having more overall happiness. Examples might include spending time with friends, eating dessert, having a leisurely morning, reading a good book, solving a puzzle, playing a sport, taking time for a hobby, or watching your favorite form of entertainment. Any of these practices can make the difference in whether a day overall feels like a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, or a good enough, occasionally great, very good day. Over time, the effect is cumulative. In the words of the writer Annie Dillard, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. There is significant benefit that can come from delayed gratification, but it's a dangerous game to risk decades of unhappy days for the hope of a happiness in some abstract future that you may or may not ever reach. Instead, the invitation is to consider how you might carve out some happiness within the life you already have. Expanding our view one more time, consider this list of what can contribute toward a happy life over the course of decades: family, friendships, celebrations and rituals, travel, study, skills mastered, money in the bank, community service, an attractive appearance, adventure, serving as an inspiration, a history of a lot of good days, a history of some euphoria. Which of these do you feel led to cultivate in this season of your life? For now, let's conclude with a poem titled Happiness by Jane Kenton. There's just no accounting for happiness or the way it turns up like a prodigal who comes back to the dust at your feet, having squandered a fortune far away. And how can you not forgive? You make a feast in honor of what was lost and take from its place the finest garment, which you saved for an occasion you could not imagine, and you weep night and day to know that you were not abandoned, that happiness saved its most extreme form for you alone. No, happiness is the uncle you never knew about who flies a single-engine plane onto the grassy landing strip, hitchhikes into town, and inquires at every door until he finds you asleep mid-afternoon, as you so often are during the unmerciful hours of your despair. It comes to the monk in his cell. It comes to the woman sweeping the street with a birch broom, to the child whose mother has passed out from drink. It comes to the lover, to the dog chewing a sock, to the pusher, to the basket maker, and to the clerk stacking cans of carrots in the night. Whether your dominant emotion right now is joy or sadness, anger or fear, you are invited to bring your whole self to this sanctuary each week as we seek to build a beloved community and accompany one another in the roller coaster journey of this life. In that spirit, I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing the final verse of Love Will Guide Us.